Hey there, Russ here. Welcome back to the shop. Well, I got it done. I told you I was going to redo my panel saw. Up to now, it's been behind me over here on my overhead door. Right here. This is the window where you can see out front right there. Right directly behind me, that's where the plywood is stored. I bring it in through the overhead door and I put it there. So it comes in the shop, goes 2 feet and shoved into the rack. And that makes it pretty nice. And when I was using the panel saw on my overhead door, I could just pull them out and lay them against there and cut them. It was really easy. Not much movement on having to move the plywood around to cut them. And when you're working with full sheets, it's so much better than having to put your plywood up on top. But I do find a problem there, as I said, that I always seem to have, especially in the winter months, I have a lot of things going on there where I have my snow blower and other things, and so I always found myself having to move them to cut a sheet of plywood. And it's not what I wanted. Originally, my very first time, well, let's go back to the very beginning. My Styrofoam 2x4s. I originally built some 4-footers and 2-footers, 2x4s with 1.25 inch thick Styrofoam and a 1/4 inch hardboard, and I glued them together, and they've been very durable. I've had them for over 3 years. They're actually marvelous. I did a video on it. I'll leave a link to it. It was the second video I ever made a little over 3 years ago. And in it, I took a sheet of plywood and I laid it up flat on my table, on my workbench, and then I took the Styrofoam 2x4s and I lifted it up, put them under there so I could lift it up so I could cut that sheet of plywood, have full support on both sides of the cut so it wouldn't break off or anything while I'm cutting it either. I showed everybody how to really use them. Anyway, that's what started this whole thing off. So I did that video, and a viewer of mine mentioned to me that he was moving into a little tiny shop. It's like a 1-car garage, or it might even been like a 10x10. I don't remember the size, but it was very small. And he says, I don't see how I could possibly cut a sheet of plywood in my shop. And if you think about it, a sheet of plywood, laying it down flat, you got to have about 18 inches all the way around to be able to walk around it and cut or whatever it is you're going to do. And so to cut a sheet of plywood on a flat surface, you got to have around 77 square feet. That's a lot of space to have in any shop, especially a small one of flat surface. I don't know about you, but I think it's been years since I've had 77 square feet of flat space somewhere in this shop. So it can be a challenge, especially in a small shop. But I found when he told me that and asked me, well, what's he going to do? Excuse me. So I thought about it for a few days, and I came up with the idea, and I then put out a video showing him how I could take those 2x4s and I attached a piece on the back with a hinge. So it was like a hinged piece with 2 pieces of wood on it, and I fastened one to my Styrofoam 2x4, and I fastened the other one right to my Beastmeyer fence rail right here. And that worked out pretty well. And I took a partial sheet because my cell was over there at the time, way over on that side, trying to move a sheet of plywood out of the rack over here, turn the corner, turn it again, and put it up there. No way you could put a full sheet of plywood up there. And you couldn't maneuver it in here to do that. But it proved the point that you could take and make and cut a sheet of plywood in a lot less space than 77 square feet. In fact, if you've got 16 square feet of space, you can cut a sheet of plywood, believe it or not. And it doesn't have to be permanently clear. You don't have to set this thing up permanently. Like now, when I had it on there, the only thing that was on the door itself is that horizontal board. All the rest of the components store away, and if I need it, I get them down, pop it on, and connect it, and I'm ready to go. It takes a couple minutes, depending on how much stuff you got in the way. So anyway, so I did that second video and showed how I attached it to my rail system on here, and he was really pleased with that. Well, that got me to thinking that, I really love to be able to cut sheets of plywood a little easier than even I had to do it. And that's what then took me to the idea of just doing it right on my overhead door. So that's when I developed my first panel saw. set up. And I did do it on that overhead door. And since then, I've had a couple of different people, excuse me, one guy in Thailand, who is a viewer, regular viewer of mine, he did one, but he put it on the side of his truck. So that when he hauls them in his truck, he pulls them out, slides them next to the truck, sets it up against the truck on that, and he cuts them. Because he usually isn't in Thailand where he works, I guess it's very tight quarters even when you're driving around in park. So this gave him the ability to be able to cut these full sheets of plywood. And he used his truck as where he would have his rack. And like mine, he would take it down and put it up as needed. So another guy took and he actually put it on the side of his lumber rack. And on his floor wasn't flat. So he had to actually make a cradle that flipped down. And that's where you set your 2x4 was on that piece. And that was always flat. And then it leaned up against his rack and attached it. And so they took this idea and took the principle of cutting the sheet of plywood, not by laying it flat, by leaving it upright and actually just tipping it about 12 degrees. That's why you only need about 16 square feet of space in order to cut a sheet of plywood, because of the fact that it's mostly setting upright and you only need space on the one side. So as long as you got 8 foot of space this way to set the sheet up against and lift it up on there, and then you have a little bit of extra space to walk back and forth, you can cut a full sheet of plywood easily in a very small spot. So if you have a very small shop, you can do that. This setup here, I normally have about 24 to 30 inches in here. I have some other things that always are in place. But this aisle right next to my table saw, this is always clear. And so now I can actually use this area, put things away, and it take me 3 or 4 minutes to set up and another couple minutes to tear down. So however long it takes to cut the piece of plywood is less than 10 minutes almost always. So this is actually a much better spot. I'm much happier. But I had to come up with a system to be able to attach it and take it down pretty quickly. So this is what I came up with, was this. It's basically all 3/4 inch plywood. I have 2 pieces here to make a saddle. It goes right over the top of my rail here for my Biesmeyer fence. I lift my Biesmeyer fence up out of the way. It can actually stay on here if I wanted to, but then I can't take and move these to where I would want them if I want to adjust these somewhere, because it might be in the way. So I usually just lift it up out of the way like it is now so that I can put these on here. I put one on each end of my rail system. My rail is 7 feet long. So, and I made note of where the halfway point is on my rail system right here. That's the center from one end to the other of this rail. And that just kind of gives me a reference point. So when I set my plywood up here, I try to get it on there so it's setting somewhat even. And then I have every foot a red mark, 1, 2, and 3. And then from 0, I go 1, 2, and 3 that way. And in between, I put a little green line at the 6-inch increment so that I kind of got a rough idea of where 1 foot and 6-inch increments are across the span of my rail system. It just kind of gives me a way to be able to kind of feel my way of putting it up there. Similar to what I did on that board where I marked it with a marker at the 1 foot levels too. So, and now I can take and put this up anywhere. Now let me show you how we set it up and show you why we set it up the way we do. First off, when you're using this type of panel saw setup, because your upright pieces that lean here, they can go anywhere in between. So let's talk about a full sheet, 8-foot piece of plywood. It's setting here, 4 foot tall, and I have my panels all set up. But I do know before I start where I want to cut that plywood. Let's say I'm going to cut a plywood at the 4 foot increment. So I'm going to end up with 2 pieces of 4 foot by 4 foot. Then I would take, and you want the 2 outer ones need to be as far out as you can. So they're at 7 feet apart from there to here. And this area in between is where these other 2 are going to be put. So if I want to cut a 4 foot piece off of an 8-foot board, I then know that this is going to be my cut point right here. So I put one on this side of that 0 mark, and I put one on this side, about 3 inches or so away from here. And now I can set up all of these. These I do lock down with a clamp, just to keep them from moving. But I kind of leave these so I can adjust them depending on my cut. Once I get my thing up here, I can still move these anywhere I want then while the plywood is up here. So if I need to do a minor adjustment, or if I'm doing more than one cut, I am able to do those things. So, and I think I may have, let me see, I think I may have company. Nope. Sure sounded like they pulled in the driveway. Anyway, so let's set this up. Let me show you how it sets up. All it is these cradles set here, have the magnet and the saddle and the plywood. I added a strip here that's at a 12-degree angle, so that when I put it in here, like this, in between, that is the position that you want it to be in. Then I just take a clamp, put it on the back side, and that squeezes it together, and that holds everything together. So now, let me set up all 4 of these and we'll go over this. So then I just take this one, drop it down, and when I know it's all straight, then take these 2, here and here, and I'm ready for a sheet of plywood. So now I got about 18 or 20 inches here that I can still work within to walk back and forth. So let's set a sheet of plywood up here and you'll see how much room and how quick this actually went together. So let's take this half. It's a full sheet, but it's only 1/2 inch, but that doesn't matter. It could be 3/4, it could be 1/2 inch, it doesn't matter. And I pull this out, and I'm going to put this kind of in the middle so I can lift it comfortably. So now I'm ready. I'm going to bring it and set it up on there. I've already put my dowels on the bottom set of holes so that it'll hold the bottom of my sheet 4 inches off the ground when I set it up. So I just set it up, I bring it out, and I set it right on there. And then I make sure that I'm kind of the same distance at both ends sticking out, and I'm pretty much centered on him now. And that's more than good enough for what we're doing. So now I just make sure these 2, this one needs to come over a little, so I can just slide it over by pushing with my foot and my hand at the same time, and I can move these 2 anywhere I want. What's important, as I said before, that when you have this type of setup, wherever your cut is, you want 2 of these on one side of the cut and 2 of these on the other side of the cut. So when I make this cut, this board has support at 2 points on both pieces, so that when I cut this all the way in half, these pieces will not move. They'll stay put. You don't pinch the blade. You don't do anything like that. So that's what makes this kind of panel saw real easy to use, and you don't have to fight the wood binding the blade when you're cutting it, when you're not supporting the wood totally. This is the easiest way I have found to cut my plywood. If you want to see me cutting up plywood in that using this panel saw setup, you can go watch my part 1 and 2 of my panel saw setup and see how I kind of did that. If you're interested in seeing me do it here, let me know. I will tell you that now I use this saw instead of using my track saw as a general rule. And if the plywood is less than 4 foot wide, I use this particular T, which goes with this saw here. So when I put this here, I know my blade, as I'm coming down, is right here on this notch. If I want to cut on this side of my T, then I know my blade is in line with the outer edge of this, of my T-square. So once I make my marker where I want it, I just line up one mark or the other where I want that, and now I'm ready to use it. And I can put this in here, and hold it. Set this in here, and I now can make my cut. And if I want to cut a full 4 foot, instead of using my 2 foot T-square, I can use this one. So if I set this up to where my 4 foot mark would be, let's say it's right here, and when I have this all set up, now I can take and just throw a clamp on here real quick to hold it in place. And now, when I line that up, instead of lining up to my edge of my track, because I still want to cut with that, I actually had this little marker. And now I look for my mark, and I line this up by putting it against here, so I can still use this track for a 4 foot stretch, rather than making one. I am going to make one eventually, but right now I've been using this. And this spacer gives me the exact spacing for where I need to line up to my mark. And I use it. And now that it's in place, I can take my saw and I can use the edge of the track as my mark as I would take and I cut all the way down using this saw to make this cut. This saw is much lighter, easier to handle than the track saw was. It also does not kick back like my DeWalt did. So I can cut with this so much easier. In fact, a lot of times, because I'm just rough cutting, I'll come along here and I'll just make my line. And then instead of using an actual guide, I just use my laser light. And when I lined it up, I can see that laser light on my line. And I can freehand follow that laser line and get a pretty straight cut without any problem. And without using the rail if I want. So, depending on what kind of cut I'm making and that, I still can do it just like I did over here. None of that has changed. Other than I now use this instead. So, if you want to see a full demonstration of my using this table saw with a full sheet of plywood and do some cutting, I will do that if enough people ask me, and I'll do it on my cuts using this one. I'll hook up my dust collection to it so you can even see just how little dust gets away from this guy when you use the dust collector that I made on here that just is magnetic and goes on here. So it works pretty well. I've been very happy with the dust collection, but if you want to see all that and actually have me cut one sheet, I'll be more than happy to show you how to do it. So just leave me a comment about it. Let me know if it's something you're interested in, and I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, if you have any questions about how I made this, in fact, let me do this. Let me give you a close-up of this. I know we're running a little late, but... So basically, this is a saddle, and it sits right over the beam, like this. With this at the back of the beam, so this sets against the saw, and that holds it in place. It has a magnet here, and the magnet and the tape are all recessed so that it sets flat on the beam without any problem, because all this is recessed. And that magnet kind of helps hold it in place, but I can still slide them. I use 2 sheets here, and the piece that goes in between of the same material is exactly fits in there nice and snug, so that when I put it in here and I pinch this side of it with a clamp, that gives me enough give that it tightens it against there and holds it tight. So that's how it's held in place. If I wanted these to be locked in place, and I may do it yet, all I have to do is drill a hole here and tap it with threads and put a knob in here, the spin knob, and I'll be able to actually lock them on there if I want to do that. But so far I haven't seen any need to do that sort of thing. It's pretty simple. This angle is 12 degrees. I just found that to be a comfortable angle for me. You can make it whatever angle you want. If you want to change that angle, and you do, and you like it better, give me a holler. Let me know, or do a video so I can see it. I may change my mind about what's the best angle, but I don't know that the angle's that critical, at least not to me. So, but this is pretty simple, making these cradles. And I already had the Styrofoam 2x4s. So if you make a set of 2x4s with the holes, and you want to see the full operation of this, leave me a message. Give me a comment. Let me know. Let me know that you want to see that and see my table saw or my circular saw in action with the dust collection. And I'll set it up and see if we can do that real quick for you guys. Anyway, I think that's it in a nutshell. I really like it up here on my table saw as opposed to being on my overhead door, as I talked about. I think that this whole panel saw has come a long way from when I first started 3 years ago. And I like to think that now that you see me mount this in a second place like this, or actually technically a third way I'm mounting it, it should open your eyes and make you start thinking that, oh, you could put the same thing anywhere you want. As long as you got 16 square feet, an 8-foot by 2-foot area of open area, all you gotta do is then attach a rail so you can stand a piece of plywood in that area, lean it up against there, and you have the makings of your own panel saw that doesn't take up much room. And if you make all this stuff detachable off of the rail like I have been doing, you don't have to leave it set up, so you can actually put it in an area where you might actually, like I do here. Nice little walkway. But if I have to cut plywood, I can set it up and do that. But most of the time, it just sits empty. So that's the whole thing in a nutshell. I want to thank you for stopping by. Any comments, any suggestions, any observations, leave them in the comments. I'd love to read them. If you have any ideas about how to do it better or not, I would love to hear it, or do a video and let me check it out. I would appreciate it. So if you learned something here or like this video, hit that like button. It lets me know I'm doing the right thing. Most importantly though, please come back again, because I'm nowhere near done. So thanks. I'm going to get this all put away. It only take a couple minutes. You don't really need to see that. So I'm going to cut it off now. But again, please come back. And thanks for stopping by. We'll